I will now call the July 16, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. The time is now 11 a.m. I would like to acknowledge that the City of Maple Ridge carries out its business on the traditional unceded territory of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Madam Clerk, could you please provide us with an overview?
Thank you. Good morning. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public for playback on our website in accordance with Council Policy 3.12. Committee of the Whole is the initial venue for council review of information to ensure that council can debate and vote on issues at a future council meeting. No voting takes place on bylaws or resolutions during Committee of the Whole. For voting purposes, council has been provided with voting cards, green for in favor, red for opposed, and yellow for point of order. For members of the public who would like to speak, an opportunity will be provided later in the meeting during community forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Welcoming, please, a motion to approve the agenda as circulated. Thank you. Moved by Councilor Dozier and seconded by Councilor Carreras. And all those in favor? Wonderful, carried unanimously. And now we have the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of June 18th, 2024. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, sorry, thank you. July the 2nd, 2024. Are there any amendments to yes, moved. Thank you, Councilor Youssef. And could I please have a seconder, Councilor Schiller? Thank you. Any discussion, please? Seeing none, I will call the question, please. All those in favor, and that carries unanimously, and the minutes are adopted.
The first item on the agenda today is item number 5.1, application 2016-195-CP, employment lands for the redesignation of the Yenadin lands to industrial and official community plan amending bylaw 7734-2021 regarding policy use and 7735-2021 regarding land use designation. Staff are in attendance to present.
Thank you. Hello, Ms. Grokovich.
Good morning. So the item before you, the first item before you this morning is the last step in a very long journey that the city has been underway on. So recognizing that it has been some time since this was before council, this presentation is set up to walk through the background, the history, and some of the content. So it's a little bit longer than a typical final reading report. I'd also just like to note when we come to the question and answer period that these bylaws have been before public hearing and received third. So this morning we are here to consider final reading for the Yenadin lands. So it is the 13 properties shown in the red box in between the northern boundary of our urban area boundary and just south of Silver Valley. Generally considered to be the land southwest of the corner of 232 and 128th. This is 13 properties that range in size from approximately 1.5 acres to 10 acres for a total of 25 hectares or 63 acres. So this photo shows you what the area looks like currently. So the reason these lands came before council was that in 2014-2015, a commercial and industrial strategy was completed that identified certain areas within the community that deserved a closer look on how to bring on additional industrial lands within our community. So staff worked through several of those sites, and in 2019, it was the time for Yenadin lands. So at that point, staff went out and began this land use redesignation process. It included some public consultation process, connecting with the owners, and it did need a bit of a pivot through the pandemic. So we did adjust our process, and we were able to come back with several concepts. And ultimately, council endorsed what was then called concept number 2, our Neighborhood Innovations Village, at the end of 2022. So very briefly, this concept really spoke to 100% employment future. The conceptual version is on the screen before you, and the principles that outlined, and these really came through the council conversation, the public consultation, as well as best planning principles at the time of how it was going to be overlaid within this concept. So it ranges from speaking to the suitable mix of employment uses, so it would be able to fit the neighborhood, while also being able to adjust to changing demands in the marketplace, and then, of course, recognizing the environmental sensitivity of the area. The details of these principles are outlined in more detail in the report as well as the appendix. Once we had the concept plan endorsed, we then began the OCP amending bylaw process. So initially, 2 bylaws were created, 7734 that spoke to the policy within the official community plan itself, and then 7735, which is a more map-based set of amendments that really speaks to the land use designations. So the history is on the screen, but essentially these bylaws received first reading in 2021, second reading in 2022, went through public hearing and was granted third reading at the May 24th, 2022 regular council meeting. In order to come forward for final, there were certain terms and conditions that needed to be met. One was the removal of the one remaining property from the agricultural land reserve. And the second one was to amend the regional growth strategy and boundary. With these 2 items now complete, these bylaws can now move forward for consideration of final reading. Before we get to the recommendation, I am just going to briefly walk through the next few slides in terms of what these bylaws contain. So that first bylaw that I mentioned, the 7734, this really speaks to the additional policy pieces that would be put into the OCP. So first off, we'd be adding a new industrial category. It was termed Employment Park Industrial, so it would join our existing categories of business park and general industrial within our Chapter 6 of our OCP. It also includes some additional policies and provisions that would be specific to this employment park category. At the moment, they're very tailored to the Yenadin Lands area, specifically on lot consolidation. And these policies came in to respond and reflect some of the existing on-site challenges. So there is a creek corridor that runs through the middle, and then we also want to make sure that future development is cohesive and reasonable for truck turning radiuses and road and network. So this is really where those details live within the OCP. It also includes a detailed set of development permit guidelines, which would be integrated into Chapter 8 of the OCP. And this is where we have more specific requirements that any development in this area would need to abide by, and it runs the full gamut. So we have graphics to improve clarity. We have, again, specific wordings for environmental conservation, access and transportation, trails, stormwater management, and even so far in terms of building design that will speak to wildlife and bird-friendly designs. The last element that's included within this first OCP amending bylaw is that we would just be amending the zoning matrix at the end of the OCP to include this new category as well as the draft associated industrial zone. As I mentioned earlier, the second bylaw is much more map focused. So it includes a couple of amendments that would be incorporated into our OCP. This one is showing the proposed change to our urban area boundary. So we'd be moving it from the dotted line to the more tightly dotted line running on 232 and 128. It also would be amending our land use designations. So the hatched area would become industrial under our OCP, and then the internal clearer area would be conservation. And then the last one that's included under this amending bylaw is just for our Schedule C, our natural features map of the OCP, which would align with the island or the internal area in the middle. So those are the 2 amending bylaws that are before you this morning. However, there are 2 complementary OCP amending bylaws I just want to draw your attention to. The one on the left is for the remaining Yenadin Lands property. So this is the one that was in the agricultural land reserve. It will come forward for final reading as well. We're just waiting for confirmation from Metro Vancouver regarding service connections before we're able to do so. And then the one on the right is a standalone application. It was excluded from the Yenadin Lands as it was pursuing a commercial future. And it will also come forward separately once their terms and conditions in order to meet final are complete. In terms of where we are in the process diagram's on the screen before you, so you can see how we have moved through the amending process from the city's official community plan. We've completed the intergovernmental referrals earlier on in the process between first reading and second reading. And then between third and final is when we connected with the Agricultural Land Commission and Metro Vancouver. So we're now here for consideration of final reading of the two OCP amending plan bylaws before you.
Thank you, Ms. Grokovich. Now I'm welcoming someone please to move this item. Moved by Mayor Rumi and seconded by Councillor Dozier. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this item, please? Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation and report. Couple quick questions, if I may, through you, Madam Chair. Would you be so kind as to refresh my memory to the outcome of the public hearing, especially from the surrounding neighborhood? Did we have a lot of opposition? Was there no response really to speak of, or was the neighborhood in favor of having this industrial development going in next door to them?
Through the chair, the details of the public consultation process are outlined in the second reading report if you'd like to refer to the detailed comments. At a very high level, it was a very popular public hearing as well as the public consultation process. And I would say that there was certainly mixed opinions on the fit for this in the area. So there was certainly some concern about what this would do to the area. There is the Yenadin Elementary School nearby, so there were certainly concerns about traffic congestion and how these two uses may play together. There is also a fairly strong recognition of the need for jobs within the community and acknowledgement that this is an opportunity to bring some employment opportunities within the community.
Thank you for that. And while I understand that it isn't a report, I just wanted to get it out in public on the records. It's the words are actually being spoken. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, have we looked at, and I know this was a consideration previously when it comes to the market players themselves, the ultimately the people that will be purchasing and occupying and working within these spaces. Are the plans that we have today in line with the feedback that we've gotten from quote unquote the market?
Through the chair, at the land use level, I would say so. I think with the way this land use plan has been designed, it offers two different types of product. The one on the eastern side is intended to be a little bit more traditional, industrial. It has a little bit of a higher height currently proposed. And then the ones on the western side is going to be a little bit more lower height, designed to integrate with the neighboring residential area. One of the elements that underpins most of these design guidelines as well as the zoning is the importance of being a good neighbor. So there are certainly additional requirements about noise and nuisance to fit within the neighborhood that are generally seen also within the best practices for new industrial zones across the region. So it is still very much in line with what the industry is seeing today.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And last question through you, Madam Chair, to staff. With the plan that we're putting forward, I understand that we've considered the environmental aspect of it and the trails and the walkability of the entire site. Have we also looked at how many jobs the site has potential to bring into our municipality? And again, I just want that number. If it's a ballpark figure, I'll live with it. Just want it out there, please.
Through the chair, I apologize. I know we've pulled that number and I have it. I just don't have it at the tip of my tongue. So I can
No.
certainly have that circulated. I apologize.
Thank you very much. No need to apologize. I appreciate that immensely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Mayor Rumi, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I know about a year ago when I was having conversations with folks, I'll get to my question. There's a lot of talk about what this area would be, and there was a whole new designation, M7. A lot of positive feedback, but folks were concerned about what it would look like. Can you maybe give us an idea of what would not be going in there?
Through the chair. So the intent of the M7 zone, which is the implementation arm of the land use designations, is really to be a sensitive light industrial zone. So we're not, and I appreciate there's always a bit of concern when the word industrial is being brought up. So we're not talking about anything that's heavy industrial or that we would typically see in our more northern areas of the community. It's probably more likely to look like a more contemporary version of the Maple Meadows Business Park, right? So at the moment, the zone is very much proposed to be 2 to 3 stories on the western side, intended for uses that take place inside, trees, landscaping. We want it to have a nice buffer between the residential areas. In other communities, you've seen like breweries or maker shops pop up within these spaces. So it can be a range of uses. We're not necessarily prescriptive on that front, other than they are really intended to be internal to the buildings themselves.
So just to follow up, so things like junkyards, mechanical yards, things like giant warehouses.
Those are not permitted under, those would be considered regular or general industrial uses and would not be permitted under this zone or in this area.
Okay, so my final question would be that when the city was working on the new zoning of M7, it took into consideration the area and the people and the comments at the time of the day. And that's why we came up with a new designation of M7, so that we could tailor make the lands into something that would fit in with people's view of what would go there.
That's
That's why
correct.
we came up with M7.
Yes, the amending bylaws before you, as well as the draft M7 zone, are very much designed and catered specifically for the Yennet Inlands and their context.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you, Mayor. Any other questions from my colleagues? A question for me, you mentioned about the site consolidation, about how the site consolidation on one end is larger and on the other end is smaller. Could you remind me, please, why we do that?
So the lot consolidation policies were brought in at second reading as we had a little bit more time to explore the area and recognize to have a logical flow of goods, people, while being able to maintain and protect the environment and manage the stormwater on site really needed to be done at that larger level. So the sizes that have been identified are different on the east and western side, and it is to reflect the properties, the characteristics of the properties on either side, because both of them have slightly different characteristics. So they're very much being tailored at that sub level so that we'll be able to ensure sufficient servicing is brought in, and servicing in the broader sense is brought in that's tailored to both sides.
Thank you for that. That helps me understand. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, thank you to staff for the presentation. And all those in favor of moving this item to the next meeting, please. Thank you. It's moved unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next item is item 5.2, application 2024-152-RZ, which is housing legislation amendments related to small scale multi-unit housing. And there, don't see, so staff are presenting, but I don't have a PowerPoint.
That's okay.
Thanks.
Please.
All right. So for this item, I'm sure we're all very much aware that the province made some changes to the housing legislation that the city had to respond to by June 30th. So we did make our deadline, as council is very much aware. And just on that note, I would say if anyone is listening in the audience, if you do have any questions about what could be allowed on your property, to please reach out to the planning department and we're happy to help. But in beginning to receive the applications in early July, we realized that there is a small amendment for clarity that would really help staff for over the summer. So the amendment before you is, sorry, how do I say this? It is nothing, it's no new material. It's very much the same material that was presented at the May 14th council workshop, as well as the level of amendments that were in your June 25th work. So this zone amending bylaw is intended to improve ease and use of the zoning regulations that we have already discussed. So what this amendment is essentially proposing is to bring the provisions that are on the screen, as well as captured under the new zoning regulations, into section 402.29 urban infill residential. So very much we are not proposing any changes to the setbacks that we have previously discussed, the height, the lot coverage, or the private outdoor space. And it is more so just pulling it into a second section within the zoning bylaw for ease of use. So in terms of next steps, as this is a bylaw that is implementing the small scale multi-unit housing requirements by the province, it is understood that under the Local Government Act that we must not hold a public hearing, and as such that this bylaw can be considered for all 4 readings of council on the same evening. So as such, the recommendations included in the report are to give them first, second, and third, as well as to be adopted at the next regular council meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Grokovich. Could I please have someone move this item, moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Councillor Youssef? And is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Understanding that Committee of the Whole is a venue for asking questions, so I'll try to phrase my question even though I already know the answer. Through you, Madam Chair, has our staff put together maybe an information sheet that's available at the counter for individuals who may be interested in developing or redeveloping their properties to be able to pick up and gives them a clear, concise layout of what's allowed and where, including maps?
So through the chair, we do have a handout available at the front counter, which translates many of these zoning bylaw parameters into a little bit easier digestion. So that is available. At the moment, we do have maps available at the front counter. We are currently working on getting them digitally available, and we're hoping to have them available very, very shortly. Once the mapping is available, there will be guides to help individuals self-serve as they work through the process to determine what is allowed and what are their particular parameters based on their property. So we are anticipating that in the very near future.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. And thank you to staff for taking on that work ahead of what's coming down the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Grokovich. And all those in favor of moving this to the July 30th special council meeting? Sorry, I missed that. Could I please have hands been up? All those in favor? Wonderful, thank you. Carried unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Next item is 5.3 for demolition requirements on in-stream rezoning applications. And this is to remove the requirement to demolish existing dwellings prior to rezoning adoption of in-stream applications specific to certain situations.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. McMillan.
Hello, good morning, Chair and Committee. So when the city adopted the amendments to our zoning bylaw, which we're just discussing to implement Bill 44 to allow for the small scale multi-unit housing or SHMU, we noted that there were 16 applications that were being that had rezonings to RT1 and RT2 to facilitate duplexes and triplexes in the city. And in these applications, there's a condition that is set in all the applications as they come forward to second reading that there be a demolition of the existing house on the subject property prior to bylaw adoption. Now, just as we've been coming into amending the zoning bylaw to introduce SHMU, we've had a number of applicants wonder about keeping the houses for some flexibility. And as council might recall, about a year ago, we had a renter who had asked if a house could be kept, and council made a one-time decision to let that house be kept. So in light of that, we're thinking at staff level to streamline rezoning application processes for lands governed by SHMU legislation to request authority to waive the demolition requirement, except in cases where the property is actively in violation of the unsightly or premises or nuisance property bylaws that the city has. So I'm recommending this potential waiving of the demolition requirement. We see some benefits. Renters can maintain their homes until a necessary absolutely to be removed for the duplex or triplex construction. The approach reduces the likelihood of vacant lots being left if the house is demolished and the zoning goes through, and the developers sometimes don't build for a little while, or sometimes not for more than 2 years, and the DP even lapses. There's also allowance for the existing owner to generate additional rental income until they are ready to remove the duplex or the house for the duplex or triplex. And probably more importantly as well, provides incentive to continue with the RT1 and RT zoning that is in process rather than abandon it and go to the new zoning provisions that are in the zoning bylaw. We had a few applicants ask about that. So the recommendation is that there be a review of the suitability of maintaining the existing dwelling based on city zoning bylaw staff to confirm if there's any issues with the property or contraventions of the city bylaws. We've talked to community bylaws about this. And if there are no issues, then there would be a recommendation to waive the demolition requirement. And once the zoning is adopted and the houses happen to be still standing after the zoning, they are granted grandfathered to legal non-conforming status as provided under the Local Government Act. Just to note that grandfathering a legal non-conforming status does not allow you to rebuild the house. If it were to be demolished or substantially destroyed by a fire, it is gone, then you lose that status. So given this, there's 16 applications in stream. A majority of them have third reading with the condition already included, having been sent forward to council. The recommendation is the demolition condition for existing dwelling be waived, subject to review of the bylaw enforcement status and report to council at the time of consideration and adoption, noting that this option to waive the requirement is being pursued by staff and recommended by staff, and it's up to council to make the decision if they wish to adopt the bylaw on that basis. And for applications that have not received third reading, that the demolition condition have a statement that says that this demolition requirement could be waived right in the recommendation going forward to council. And again, it's up to council at the end of the day at adoption to decide if they would wish to pursue the demolition or not. Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you, Mr. McMullen. Could I please have someone move the item? Moved by Councillor Youssef and seconded by Mayor Rumi. Thank you. Any discussion on this item, please? Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McMullen, for the presentation and report. Through you, Madam Chair, aside from the 16 in-stream properties that we're looking at, you mentioned that there may be the ability in the future to also waive the same demolition requirement for other properties. I would be very much in favor of that, as you said, to maintain some of the rental stock that we have out there and be able to have the applicant still have access to that income. My question is to do with the type of redevelopment that's happening. Is this strictly to do with the triplex and fourplex, or will this be an approach that we're taking to all of our rezoning and redevelopment applications coming in?
Madam Chair, through Councillor Youssef and committee, this is just targeted at the RT1 and RT2 for duplex and triplexes. And so including it in where there's a recommendation already passed and included in third reading, that there's an ability to waive that would be reported back to council. And for those that have not received third reading, that would be included in the recommendation for staff to pursue if deemed appropriate. But it doesn't extend other applications and other classes of rezoning. No.
To follow up through you, Madam Chair, is there a plan or a thought to have it include other rezoning applications outside of RT1 and RT2?
No, it's just for this because we've had this change in the SSMUH zoning provisions put into the bylaw, and we have an RT1 and RT2 that really sort of duplicate the land use, and then these questions have arisen. So we haven't thought about that for other zonings.
Lastly, through you, Madam Chair, again, outside of this particular amendment that we're looking at for these 16 properties, our redevelopment process. So a scenario where a single family is being redeveloped, some of our requirements make the property uninhabitable in advance of issuance of a building permit, for example. Are we also looking at changing that process so that we allow residents to be able to occupy the space for a longer period of time before they actually have all their permits in hand and now the work can start of the tear down and rebuild?
Madam Chair, through Councillor Youssef, we haven't looked at that, and we could look at some of the requirements. I think the main requirement is the demolition of the buildings. I'm not really aware of other requirements that would make the building uninhabitable if it was inhabited in a lawful way, consistent with our bylaws.
Removal, for example.
Oh, right. That's something that staff could look at if we wish to pursue this for more rezonings.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. Mayor Rumi, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I understand the theory behind all of this and not necessarily opposed to it. But I am concerned, so where is the line that say it's a nuisance? Or does it have to be habitable? Or what if the place is sitting completely empty and there's nobody in there?
Madam Chair, through to Mayor Rumi, we have bylaws for the unsightly premises bylaw that allow for action to take action to enforce on removing hazards or even demolishing buildings on occasion. There's also powers under the community charter to deem a property a hazard, which we've pursued on a couple occasions, I believe. But there is no bylaw that disallows an empty house. I'm talking to Michelle Adams, empty houses are allowed to be maintained as empty as long as the owner leaves them in good and repair and not an unsightly state and aren't a hazard to the community.
So if we look at some of the bylaws, and I'm not sure if you can answer this question, we do have some of these types of lots around.
Mhm.
And I do understand that at times we have to chase to do things, or we have to go in and clean it up and then bill the property owner. How will people, developers, owners, how will they know, or how will we better enforce that action? Because they become fire hazards at some point, right? So is our current bylaw that's in place for nuisance building, is that enough? Is it appropriate?
Madam Chair, through to Mayor Rumi, I couldn't answer on the details of our existing bylaws. We did run this past Michelle Adams, our Director of Community Bylaws, and she was comfortable with the current bylaws that we have. She did identify 2 properties of the 16 that she thought might not be eligible based on bylaw action and that we would not put forward for waiving of this demolition. But I would have to defer to Ms. Adams about the details of our bylaws.
So did I hear you say that of the 16, 2?
Two have been identified through, so we've on this list consulted with community bylaws, and 2 are identified as ones that are not suitable, and we would not bring them forward. We would not do a waiver proposal to council for those 2 dwellings.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Mr. Hartman.
Thank you, Chair. To yourself, members of council, the item in front of council is about houses that are or residents that are currently occupied. The issue about nuisance property and derelict properties is another conversation that council will be having downstream, and that links to other strategic work that council's directed as part of the work plan. But the item in front of council given that you have the SMU legislation, this is the ability for someone to go through a redevelopment process while leaving a well-maintained and occupied residence habitable at the time. The issue that your worship is mentioning is around derelict property, nuisance properties, and that's a completely different kettle of fish than what's currently in front of council, and that'll be coming back to council for further discussion at a later date. Hope that helps clarify. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And looking for further questions. Some questions from me, Mr. McMullen. Just to ask you for a third time. So this only applies to the 16 in-stream applications. This does not apply to other applications that would.
That is correct.
In
It
the
just
future.
applies to rezonings to the RT1 and RT2 zone for duplex and triplex, where we have this new legislation bringing in those housing options.
And so after the SMU legislation comes in, does this make this would this just carry on for future applications such that they don't need to be demoed?
Madam Chair, through the way the resolution is worded, it would, but we're not expecting to see too many RT1 and RT2 applications in the future, given that the the RUR, the rural zone that implements the provincial SHMU or SSMU, it's going to make these applications fairly far and in between because
I
it's an
see.
outright use in the zoning and
I
people
see,
can apply for a
thank you.
building permit.
So we don't expect this to be an issue past once that legislation comes in.
And that, yes.
Thank you. And for the, just to make sure the, and going, and this is also, as Councilor Yusuf pointed out, only for ones that are going to become duplexes and triplexes, is that, and for fourplexes and this, to up to sixplexes that the SHMU legislation allows, what becomes of those? Or
Madam,
that doesn't apply to the 16 applications?
the 16 applications are for just duplexes and triplexes that we have in stream. We don't have any sixplexes in stream. There are a few courtyard housing projects, but we were looking at projects, basically most of the SSMU zoning provisions and throughout most of it, there are a few areas of 6 units, but are mainly for 4 units. And we thought we just limit it to the duplex and triplex.
Thank you. Are there any in-stream applications for fourplexes?
At this moment, I can't recall any that are fourplexes. There are a number for courtyard, which can have 4 units, but they're in different combinations of 2, 2, and 2, or different
Right.
combinations, yes, of
Right,
above
and-
4 and above.
Right, and this is a small point, but I just wouldn't want to have, 16 applications, we have the special requirement waived, whereas there's 1 or 2 that are left behind.
Right.
So if we could check that, that would.
Madam Chair, we can check. I don't, as I say, I don't think we can check and do a sort. I don't not recall that there's any fourplex applications, just courtyard and duplex and triplex.
Wonderful. And could you clarify for me as well, when the demolition would be required? At what point the demolition now would be?
So if this resolution were to pass and a property was eligible to be, have a waiving of the demolition requirement, and council agreed to it at the end, zoning adoption, then the house would be able to be maintained there as long as an owner wanted to demolish it for a duplex or a triplex. It'd become grandfather legal non-conforming and be able to be maintained that long. And that happens in some other zoning where the city changes zoning in areas. There are a number of grandfathered properties throughout the city, and they sometimes sit there for quite a few years until somebody exercises the new zoning.
Understood. Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, I would like to thank you, Mr. McMullen, for the presentation and ask all those in favor of moving this to the into the next council meeting. Could you please get a show of hands? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next item 5.4 is application 2021-352-RZ for property located at 23613 132 Avenue to rezone from RS2 to RM1 to permit the future construction of 18 townhomes. And there is a presentation by staff.
Hello again.
Okay, Madam Chair, this application is for a site that's designated medium high density residential. The existing zoning is RS2 single detached suburban residential. And the proposed zoning is RM1 low density townhouse residential. And the site is approximately 1 acre. And the proposal is to construct 18 townhouses. This is subject property in the cadastral map at 236th Street and 132nd Avenue. And this is subject property on the ortho photo showing the built environment and the emerging townhouses around the site from 2023. And this is the designation showing the low medium density designation on the site and part to the southwest. It's noted this development proposal is to rezone the subject property from RS2 to RM1 to permit the construction of 18 townhouse units. The site would be accessed from 132nd Avenue to the south. And each dwelling unit would have a double garage and with at least one space having electric roughed in capability for level 2 charging. There are 4 visitor spaces provided. And of note, 4 of the units have tandem parking spaces and 14 have side-by-side parking spaces, although it's not noted up here, it's noted in the report. Which is allowed under the bylaw that percentage of 4 out of 18. And if the application was successful to reach adoption, there'd be a $7,400 per unit community amenity charge paid for a total of $133,200. Such rate applicable at third reading. If the application proceeds through to development variance permit near adoption, there are several variances requested to reduce the setbacks on the exterior side, which is the west side on the street frontage from 6 meters to 5 meters. In the rear parcel line at the top of the property in the north from 7.5 to 5.8 meters, and the interior side setback on the east side of the property from 7.5 to 6.3. And this application for variance and development permit would be considered together just prior to consideration of adoption. There's also a proposed variance to waive the underground services for the site. There'd be a cash in lieu provision that would be provided to the city, given that this is a fairly small section of frontage that could be used in the future, but rather than have this smaller section of frontage provide the undergrounding now, it'd be a cash in lieu payment as noted in the report. And this is the site plan with the south is actually to the right. So 132nd Avenue is to the right. And there's a driveway off 132nd Avenue, and then going north to a T intersection with the community amenity space in the northeast corner of the site. So if the recommendations, the application be given a second reading forward to the public hearing, and there'd be the following conditions, including the registration of the rezoning servicing agreement as a covenant, and the receipt of the security deposit is required. Road dedication on 132nd Avenue, 236 streets. Consolidation of the subject properties, covenant being registered for the geotech report, on-site removal of existing buildings. In addition to the Ministry of Environment Site Disclosure Statement, just an underground fuel tank investigation report confirming there's no tanks on site, and that'd be the voluntary contribution of $133,200 for such rate applicable at third reading for community amenity contributions. Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you for the presentation. Could I please have someone move the item? Moved by Councillor Youssef and seconded by Councillor Dewick. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing no discussion, thank you, Mr. McMullen, for the presentation. And all those in favor of moving this to the next council meeting? Mr. Mayor?
Sorry.
Wonderful.
I
Moved
was following the thing. It was all over the place.
carried unanimously.
What's
Thank
going
you.
on here right now?
Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next item is 5.5, application 2024-155-VP for property located at 11300 Pazarina Place to increase the fence height for a daycare play area associated with the commercial residential building that is nearing completion. Staff are in attendance to present.
Madam Chair, it's a development variance permit for a site that's designated commercial in zone C1 commercial on Pazarina Place and is approximately 0.59 acres in area. It's a very relatively small variance for a fence height for a childcare in the commercial mixed use apartment building at Pazarina Place and Lougheed Highway. That's part of the Polygon development there. It's the site here, the ortho photos just showing the building when it was under construction last year. And the development variance permit is being received to install a fence or daycare play space associated with the commercial residential building that's nearing completion. The requested variances to allow for translucent decorative fence to be mounted along the perimeter of the building, which is on top of the parking garage podium, which the building sits on, and measuring up to 2.44 meters in height, or a little over 8 feet in height. This variance is to allow this specifically fence to be varied from 1.2 meters along the Lougheed Highway frontage to 2.44 meters along that frontage, which is not effectively the front, but is technically under the zoning the front of the property. It also allows for the fence height along the conservation area to the southeast to be increased, and from the rear to be increased from 2 meters. There's a higher provision for the rear and side from 2 meters to 2.44 meters. And the variance is supported for safety reasons of providing a protective, clear fence for the childcare that's going to have a play area on top of the amenity. And given that's construction location, the negligible impact when viewed by the public. And this is a site plan. There's more plans in the report that just shows the fence. To the right is the fence facing Lougheed Highway, which is again under the bylaw, the front, but not really the functional front of the property, which is to the west on the top of the screen. And then to the southeast, which is, depending how you look at it on the angled highway, the conservation area, and a little bit wrapping around to the left, facing the rear of the property. So the recommendation is that a corporate officer be authorized to sign and seal this DVP 2024-155 EP. Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you. Could I please have someone move this item? Councillor Youssef is moving it and seconded by Councillor Schiller. Thank you. Any questions on this item? Seeing no questions, thank you, Mr. McMullen. And all those in favor of moving this to the next council meeting? We're just waiting for one more, Mr. Mayor. Wonderful, carried unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Good job.
Sorry. The next item is item 8.1, Urban Forestry Management Strategy. This has been developed using input from staff, council, and community engagement. The urban forest management system consists of 4 goals, 10 strategies, and 59 detailed action items to achieve the target of a 40% tree canopy coverage within the urban area by 2045. The consultant for this project is online, and please bear with us a moment while she shares her screen for the presentation.
And if I may, while the consultant is getting ready to Madam Chair, I'd just like to introduce the topic, and as Amanda Grochwich also shared, this is our final step in creating a significant strategy. So a journey that we've been on. This one creates the city's first urban forest management strategy, which is to develop a 20-year vision. Council had an update on this work in February, and at that time heard the outcomes of our first round of public engagement. Were provided an update on our interim report, and also were able to weigh in on the proposed canopy target for our urban containment area of 40%. Just a reminder that our current state of our urban forest is 50% canopy coverage across all of Maple Ridge, urban and rural. And we are currently at 38% canopy target within the urban containment area. The work has been led by Mr. Neufeld, and as you just heard, by our consultant, Diamond Head Consulting, supported by a cross-departmental team. This has led to the draft management strategy before you today, which outlines 4 key goals and dozens of strategies, and informed by 2 rounds of public engagement to get us to where we are today. Ms. Chang from Diamond Head Consulting, I think she has the presentation loaded up, and she will start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm just waiting to share.
Thank you.
Sorry, bear with us for a moment or two. Having some technical difficulties. It will be a moment or two. We're just waiting for the consultant to email us the presentation.
Thank you, staff, and we will take a 5-minute recess, please.
Party.
Ms. Cheng, can you see the presentation now? Okay,
Yes,
I
I
will have
can.
to advance the slides for you, so please indicate that for me and we will reconvene in a couple of minutes.
Yes, that's great.
Thank you.
While we're waiting, is it possible to mute when I do presentation because I can hear echo all the time. It's hard to talk when I hear myself. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Resuming our committee of the whole meeting. Ms. Chang, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Oh, I still hear the echoing.
We hear you just fine on our side.
Okay. Maybe I'll. Are you able?
Now we're not able to hear you.
How about now?
Now it's wonderful. Thank you.
Are you able to hear?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us? We hear you just fine.
Hello.
Can she hear us?
Are you?
We're able to hear you just fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about the technical issues here and there.
No worries. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here to present the final draft of the urban forest management strategy for the city of Maple Ridge. And just a quick overview of the agenda for the presentation today. I will share a brief overview of the projects, share the updates to public engagement that has occurred since we last met with council, and provide an overview of the final urban forest management strategy draft. As Valerie mentioned, the purpose of this presentation is to provide update to council regarding the urban forest management strategy and request council adoption of the strategy. Please go to the next slide. And next slide, please. And yes, thank you. Just a quick overview. The project is about developing an urban forest management strategy. When we talk about the urban forest in Maple Ridge's context, it means a network of trees and associated ecosystems such as shrubs and soils within the city. It includes trees along streets, on private properties, and in parks and natural areas. And the intent of this strategy is to provide strategic direction and guidance in order to maximize the benefits from trees to the community and minimize risk of trees for public safety. Next slide, please. So a very quick recap of the timeframe of this project. We started the project in summer 2023 with the background research and urban forest mapping exercise. Then we used that information to share with the public in phase 1 engagement, and we also use that information in the drafting of the strategy contents. We started the phase 1 engagements in the fall 2023. Our intent was to understand people's priorities for urban forest management within the city of Maple Ridge, as well as their values of the urban forest to help inform the draft urban forest vision and goals. We then went into the drafting of the strategy in the fall to winter 2023. When that was completed, we launched the second phase of engagements in winter 2024. We made updates according to the feedback received from the public, council, and staff. And here we are presenting the final draft strategy reports to council. Next slide, please. So just a very quick overview of the public engagement. As mentioned, there were 2 phases of public engagement in this project. Public engagement is a key component of this project because we want to make sure that we develop a strategy that reflects the community's priorities and concerns and voices. So the phase 1, as mentioned, was really about gathering community inputs to inform the developments of the urban forest vision and supporting goals. And phase 2 of engagement happened after the draft strategy was completed. We invited the community to review the draft strategy and seek their feedback on the draft strategy. Next slide, please. So just a very quick overview of the phase 1 engagement. On the slide, you can see the number of people from Maple Ridge that we have managed to engage during phase 1 engagement. We have launched an online survey and online mapping tool where people can share the places that they really like or places that they think needs improvement. We also had organized various open house pop-up in-person events for people to post their comments and share their questions with city staff. We also launched a project page where we share the most important engagement dates and key findings from the background review and urban forest mapping exercise. Next slide, please. During phase 2 engagements, we also launched an online survey. We hosted an online open house where people can hear a brief summary of the draft strategy and share their comments and feedback. We have updated the most relevant and important information about this project on the project page. In addition to that, we have promoted the projects and the key engagement dates through the city's social media and news and ads. Next slide, please. In terms of the feedback we've received in phase 2, in general, participants were very positive about the contents and quality of the draft strategy. Over 90% of participants strongly or somewhat agree with the proposed vision, which is stated on the right of the slide. Next slide, please. We also asked people to rank in terms of priority what they felt the most important goals and strategies were for Maple Ridge. The chart on the left shows people's ranking of goals. Most people considered protecting and expanding the urban forest as the most important goals for Maple Ridge. And that's followed by integrating and adapting the urban forest management strategy. On the right shows the 5 strategies that were ranked as highest priorities by over 70% of participants. This included planting trees to improve climate resilience and equity, updating policies, bylaws, guidelines for a better protection and planting of trees, achieving adequate staff and funding to support the implementation, protecting and restoring forest lands to support biodiversity and healthy ecosystem functioning, and integrating urban forest management planning into city and regional strategic initiatives. Next slide, please. So I will give you a very brief overview of the final urban forest management strategy. Next slide, please. As mentioned, in the final strategy, we've proposed a vision, 20-year urban forest vision, which is stated on the slide, a canopy cover targets for strategic goals and supporting strategies and actions. And here's the proposed vision, which we presented to council previously in March. Next slide, please. So to set up the urban forest tree canopy targets, one of our primary considerations is the current condition of the urban forest. And through the canopy mapping and analysis, we learned that the canopy cover is 54% within the OCP area as mapped, as you can see in the slide, the mapped area. And 38% within the urban areas, which are the inserts of areas with thinner boundaries within the map. Next slide, please. In addition to the current canopy cover, we've considered the regional context. For example, Metro Vancouver's 40% canopy targets within UCB, and the past canopy changes in Maple Ridge and the anticipated changes in the future. We recommend a 40% canopy target by 2045, which is the same as last we met with council. We have heard and considered council's feedback and setting a 40% or plus canopy targets, and that was also what we've heard from the community in phase 2 engagement. The reason why we recommended to stay with 40% targets for now is because we have also considered the capacity of the city to plant new trees to achieve these targets, the anticipated level of development in the future, and city's ability to retain trees and replace trees with development. And I also want to acknowledge that trees take time to grow. We think that reaching 40% tree canopy targets is realistic by 2045, and we could anticipate the canopy cover continue to increase beyond 2045, as long as the level of developments and their impacts on canopy cover stabilize. Next slide, please. In terms of the goals, they remain unchanged, focusing on next. Can you press 4 times? Thank you. Sorry about the animation there. The goals, strategic goals remain unchanged as protecting, expanding the urban forest, integrating and adopting the urban forest management strategy, managing and sustaining the urban forest, and last goal, focusing on engagement and the partnership. Next slide, please. So goal number 1 focuses on protecting and expanding the urban forest. Under this goal, there are 3 strategic strategies focusing on updating policy framework to strengthen the protection and planting initiative. The second strategy focusing on protecting and restoring forest areas for biodiversity and ecosystem purposes. And the third goal focuses on planting for climate resilience and equity. Next slide, please. So 16 actions have been proposed under this goal. Here are some examples, and you can see the full list of actions that we propose in the full strategy document. So some examples we include here are introducing tree density, for example, 40 trees per hectare, or tree canopy minimums into planning tools, such as zoning bylaw, to ensure adequate trees, number of trees are either retained or protected with developments. Maple Ridge has a tree protection and management bylaw already. We have reviewed the bylaw and made specific recommendations on protection measures. For example, introducing more requirements on additional compensation for removal of significant trees. Developing a planting plan is important here, as it provides guidance on street tree and park tree planting on the long run. This includes identifying planting locations, specifying replacing rates, for example, 1-to-1 replacement rates, and prioritizing planting in low equity areas. Maple Ridge has abundant forest resources. We have included actions regarding protecting and managing forest areas in Maple Ridge. For example, developing a biodiversity strategy to set conservation targets and guide future land acquisition and restoration processes to make sure that the critical habitat areas are protected and their corridors connecting those habitats are protected. Next slide, please. Goal number 2 is about integrating the strategy with broader city policies and initiatives such as housing and climate actions and biodiversity protections, achieving sufficient resources and monitoring and reporting progress and changes to ensure that we are on the right track to achieve the established vision and targets. Next slide, please. 21 actions are proposed under this goal. Examples include developing additional canopy targets in addition to the 40% urban area targets to guide detailed implementation in neighborhood and in park areas. And incorporate those targets into the OCP and other relevant policies and tools for better implementation. Although that by park departments, tree protection and planting is highly connected with other departments' work, such as environmental planning, engineering, and development. So we recommend an action to establish an interdepartmental working group within the city to identify opportunities and synergies as well as feasible solutions for tree infrastructure or development conflicts. Implementing the urban forest management strategies effectively requires adequate funding and staffing levels. Therefore, there is an action about establishing dedicated annual budget for planting new trees in streets, parks, and natural areas, and examining staffing levels and needs for the implementation. Next slide, please. Goal 3 is more operational. The intent is to ensure trees are managed well so that they are healthy and long-lived and impose minimal risk to public. Next slide. 12 actions are included under this goal. Here are some examples. So the city has inventoried the intensively managed street trees during the development of this strategy. We include an action here to continue and complete the inventory of street trees and park trees within urban areas. Having this information is really critical for understanding what we need to manage, the condition of resources that we are managing, so that we can proactively plan necessary actions such as pruning, removal of diseased and dead trees, and planting or replacing those removed trees. Another action example is targeting a 5 to 7 year pruning cycle for street trees and a 10 to 12 year pruning cycle for park trees, according to the industry best practices. Asset management is a very powerful tool for urban forest management. In essence, it treats urban forests as and trees as natural assets or green infrastructure. And we have an action about integrating urban forest assets into the city's asset management system. This is an important step, and it includes establishing average life expectancies for urban forest assets. And based on that, we can establish life cycle costing for better budgeting and replacement schedules to guide future planting efforts. In often cases, trees in urban areas are considered as a conflict or barrier to, for example, development or road construction. And that's why we are proposing an action to develop a decision framework to help determine decisions regarding tree conflicts and mitigation solutions. And this ties back to the action about establishing an interdepartmental working group to better create, to facilitate the process of creating feasible solutions to resolve the potential conflicts that may arise during development or other city work processes. And finally, establishing a risk management policy to manage forest areas, especially forest edge areas from development, to ensure public safety is quite important, especially now we are seeing more extreme weather events such as heat waves and storms. That's very important to consider to make sure that our community is protected free from the risk of trees. Next slide, please. Goal number 4 is about engaging in partnership. So as mentioned, about half of the canopy cover is located on private land in Maple Ridge. Engaging private landowners in planting and protecting trees are important. Under this goal, strategies and actions are about engaging the community to enhance stewardship of the urban forest and fostering partnerships with external groups for strategy implementation. Next slide, please. 12 actions are proposed under this goal, including developing a communications and stewardship plan. That's important for identifying key partners and resources needed, exploring engagement opportunities, and providing directions on engagement approaches. As we continue to update policies and bylaws and guidelines, it is important to develop clear resources for homeowners, developers, and other property owners about the latest policy updates and tree care information. And we also have an action about continue to explore opportunities to collaborate with external partners such as school district and the post-secondary institutions for tree planting, student internships, and research opportunities, especially considering past and existing collaborations with those research institutes and the school districts. And as well as the proximity with some of these agencies like UBC's Malcolm Research Forest. I will leave it there, and thank you again for your time. Looking forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ching. And could I welcome someone please to move this item, moved by Councillor Duick and seconded by Councillor Schiller. And is there any discussion on this item, please? Councillor Schiller.
Thank you to Chair. Thank you to staff and consultants for all your work on this. And as you mentioned, it's a large piece of work coming before us today. So I do have some questions. I'll just start with sort of the overall target and the timeline. In the staff report, I feel like the 2045 is a year that's referenced to achieve 40%, but in the strategy itself, I see the year 2050 mentioned a few times. And can you just clarify if it's 2045 or 2050?
Yes, happy to clarify through the chair. It is 2045, so our strategy targets a 20-year time horizon. Really, that would be, I guess, 21 because we're in 2024. So, but roughly 20 years. Really, the goal is to have a long-term vision because, as Cindy had mentioned, trees take a long time to grow. And so what we plant today, hopefully a canopy and the results of that tree planting, in the next short amount of years will have that later on effect and hopefully a cumulative effect for much longer than 20 years as well. So 20 years.
Okay, 2045. So then will the strategy be updated with 2045?
Yeah, I think some of the reason why you may see 2050 referenced is Metro Vancouver is also doing urban tree canopy related activities as well. And some of the targets that they're referencing are 2050. And so wanting to align our strategy within the regional context, sometimes that 2050 is in there as well. But yes, of course, we can update it and make it clear.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to get a handle on the nuts and bolts of difference between 38% and 40%. So I know there is some information in the report about how many trees that would require. I'm looking at page 56 of the PDF. Can you tell me how many trees the city planted last year? I'm just trying to get a sense of like business as usual versus what we're proposing.
Yeah, through the chair. We currently don't have a dedicated budget for planting new trees. We have dedicated funds for planting replacement trees for street trees that die or park trees that die. That being said, there are new trees that are planted every year. So when we do park development, so we plant new trees in a new park, we plant new street trees along brand new roads. I don't have quickly at hand that number of across the city how many new trees were planted, but it's often in new developing areas where new street trees get planted along new roads and any of our new infrastructure. But right now, and one of the recommended actions in the action plan is to have that dedicated budget for planting new trees above and beyond what our typical kind of infrastructure plans include.
Okay, fair enough. Can you give me a sense of the cost, like a financial cost of getting from 38% to 40%? So obviously we need to buy trees and we need to plant trees and we need to take care of trees. I understand these would need to be very rough numbers, but again, just trying to help me understand the implications of that change that we're going for. Can you put any numbers to that?
I'll take a bit of a stab at here. I won't have an aggregate number for you, but just for context, a single tree to plant and to water for at least a year is about $900 or so in today's dollars.
Mm-hmm.
That's everything for the cost of purchasing the tree, getting it to its location, planting it, and then watering it through a year of season. So it's not an insignificant cost. It's, you know, there are some numbers referenced in the plan about how many additional trees that the city would need to plant on public property and how many additional trees we would need to encourage the public to plant on private property to meet those goals. And so it is a very aspirational number, I think, and it will take a lot of effort to get to that.
Thank you. That is very helpful. Can you tell me how much revenue we collected last year from the cash in lieu program that we offer for developers when trees are cut and we collect cash? Do you have a?
Yeah, surprisingly, I do, or a ballpark number at least. So apologies through the chair. I think that number is around 65,000 or so. Of what it does fluctuate a bit year by year based on, you know, which applications are opting for that option or having to use that. But that is money that is really for replacing tree canopy that's been lost. It's not necessarily net new trees.
Yes, fair enough. I'm just trying to get a handle on, the tree financial picture in the community. So thank you for that. And you touched on the importance of engaging private property owners in this work. When we look at getting to 40%, there's a lot of trees on private land that are required. So if I missed it, I apologize, but in the action items, I didn't see it clearly spelled out that we would develop a program to support private owners in obtaining and planting trees. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about why that wasn't included.
Through the chair, I do believe there is at least one of the action items in here, and apologies, I have to kind of quickly scan. But there was one about supplementing or subsidizing private property tree planting efforts. And so the way this is done in a lot of other communities is a community tree sale or something where the city will subsidize the cost of a new tree. So that residents can plant this in their yard. There's ways to do coupons for local nurseries so they can go and select a tree and everything. There's some flaws and some things to work out with each of those kind of processes, but I believe that there is a recommended action in here. And if I had a minute, I would scan it and find it for you. But that's definitely has to be part of this plan because 15% of the city of the entire tree canopy is the city's. So that's relatively small. And so, our sphere of influence directly is quite small. So we have to do things that encourage people to want to plant trees and to have a tree canopy on their private property as well.
Okay, so just to repeat, so staff's concept is that that incorporation of having private landowners, participate in a city program to plant trees, it has to be part of this plan. Then I don't need to rifle through all the action items as long as I'm confident that that's there. Okay, my next question is for the consultant, just because you've worked in different communities. And I can sort of see by looking at other targets that are established that they're often that what you have and what you're going for are not too far apart, is sort of my sense from just looking at other plans developed in the area. Can you speak to me about other communities that you've worked in or that you're aware of in terms of what is the most ambitious target that you've ever seen? So from where we are today, the biggest percentage increase, that would be something that would be interesting to me.
Through the chair, that's a very good question. So based on my understanding of some municipalities in the region, some of the ambitious goal may include maybe 10% of canopy cover in 20-30 years. That really depends on a lot of different factors. For example, the level of developments or redevelopments and the municipalities' capacity and control over some of the land. So if the municipality has higher percentage of land designated as protected area or parks, then they will have a better ability to control the planting and removal and management of trees over there. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but in Maple Ridge context, I know 2% increase in 20 years may seem very minimal, but I would also like to mention that Maple Ridge is a large and fast-growing community. So there is a lot of forest areas to begin with in Maple Ridge. And given the anticipated developments that would include cutting some of the trees in those areas. So the numbers that we are presenting today, the 2% in net increase, includes recovering some of the lost canopies through developments, as well as planting additional trees in order to achieve the 2% canopy targets. Again.
Thank you. That is helpful.
And Councillor Schiller, we didn't quite track your time, but maybe if I can.
We're
hold
feeling
you
we're
to-
getting there.
So hold on to your questions for round two.
Please come back to me
Is
around.
that all
two.
right? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for this work on this. I know this has been a massive piece of work, and it's also been a topic of conversation at the metro level, as well as all cities are sort of grappling with this. I have a quick question because a huge piece of legislation just dropped on us sort of in the middle of this. And with the new housing legislation changes, I think it's going to be even hard just to maintain our 38%. So did this report and these recommendations take into account the new legislation since it dropped sort of partway through this?
Yeah, through the chair, really good to bring that up because it did happen kind of midway through this process, and definitely something that Diamond Head Consulting looked at and considered and did incorporate into the tree canopy models. There is a small section in the report, I don't have the page number offhand, but it does address that and how we'll need to just be really cognizant of setbacks to allow for space for trees to be planted or space for trees to be retained on those lots as well.
Okay, and I have one more question on that because, again, all these things are happening in tandem is with some of the small scale SMU legislation. I don't know if I'm ever going to get used to that acronym name. We did do a lot about setbacks and things like that. And I'm wondering if there is any collaboration between it, because I do recognize that we were making finalized decisions on something and this is new coming at. I wonder if that was taken into account when we were looking at it the last few months. And this may be planning or something that has to go to.
So we have been working with community planning on the development of this strategy and talking about the SMU legislation and how that will work with this. At the end we are this is led by the province, and so we do need to do this, but I think there will be still opportunities in those front yard setbacks, in those rear yard setbacks to still have space for tree growth and tree root growth, which is really kind of the biggest thing that we need to reserve that space for.
Thank you. The other thing I'm really interested in, because I think that sort of regardless of where we target an increase or maintain or whatever, I'm really curious about the policy piece. And there's a lot of discussion around policy and around on page 39, it sort of talks about the bylaws and policies and associated plans, policies and guidelines. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the policies that will help us achieve the increase in target, and if those policies will be coming to us and what we can look at as sort of a vision. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but if you can just walk us through a little bit of those policy pieces that we're going to have to be looking at to make sure that we reach that target. I'd be really interested in that.
Yeah. Through the chair, it probably even more so than the policies, the guiding documents of the area plans, those are really the important ones to be able to set neighborhood canopy targets, and through development permit guidelines, those kind of things are places and opportunities that as we look to redevelop certain areas of the city, that we can incorporate tree canopy principles and targets that could even be applied on a small scale on a site-by-site kind of basis as well. In addition to reviewing our tree management bylaw, obviously that's a big piece of work as well. But that's, those are there's a number of strategies and policies and guiding kind of documents listed there on page 39. Each of them probably have some aspect of tree retention or additional tree protection or tree related planting.
So we do have a plan as to, and I know that there's a step-by-step piece in the bottom and these are in there. There is a plan for the most important ones coming to us first to help us. The other thing I want to just chat about is a little bit more about the sort of check-in process. So one of the slides talked about 10 to 12 years for inventory of trees. In one of the slides, this is a 40-year plan, essentially, if we're going to 2045. So that looks at like a check-in halfway through to see where we're at. Is that sort of an appropriate check-in? Like, I'm just, if we have to reassess this goal or this increase, or to measure, like, if we have to wait 10 years to measure how we're doing, I'm just wondering if 10 years is the appropriate check-in, or if there should be like a 5-year check-in, or what that review looks like for us in measurement.
Through the chair, actually, if you look to page 81 of not of the PDF, but of the document itself, there's a monitoring plan. It's almost the very last page. And it talks about what kind of frequency of measurement and monitoring and check-ins that there should be throughout this plan. You'll see some of the items in there are actually listed as annual check-ins, based on number of new trees planted. Some of them a little longer term. I think 5 years is kind of the other kind of main time frame. So rechecking in on our canopy coverage every 5 years. And that gives us opportunity to kind of adapt to this strategy as we go through time, and see what's working well and what maybe needs some adjustments. So.
Good. Yeah, I was just, when I saw the 10 to 12, I was sort of like, but it seems like a break for us to be doing some of that. And then I think, page 46, I just have a question. That's the one that has the little red dots, the yellow dots, and the flipping through this report here. Just gonna find it. So there's a few areas of red. Most of them are yellow, very, very few greens. And then, so I imagine through this check-in, we'll be looking at ways to move the red dots to yellow first. Is that sort of our priority areas?
Through the chair, I'd say our priority areas are really in the action plan. And the action plan is separated by short-term, medium, and long-term priority items.
And with dollars,
so really focusing on the short-term ones. First, the page on the Urban Forest Report Card on page 46 goes through a number of it's a snapshot of how we're doing in a state where we're prior to having an adopted urban forest management strategy. So there's a lot of things that we could still improve on in here. And I would expect that those would trend to the good and optimal eventually as we get through the action plan.
It was good there weren't all reds.
Exactly.
And just one last thing, and then I'm done. I believe it's on page 40. Nope. Page 66. This one's really important to me as we continually talk about working with senior levels of government and leveraging any dollar that we can. And this talks about funding opportunities. And I just want to make sure that we do have a plan to make sure that we're checking in, that we're applying, and that we're not missing any opportunities to get funding from whatever level of government we can get it from.
Yep. Through the chair, I'm very happy to report that, apologies, I'll pass this over to Valerie.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Carrera's question. I think that what would come from this is currently one of council's objectives and key results the creation of the strategy, but then we would have an annual ongoing check-in held with council on the implementation.
Perfect. Thanks. I just don't want to ever leave any money that we can get on the table for us. So that's, I was really glad to see that in there, that it is a priority to make sure, because there's lots of grants out there.
Thank you for that. And just on the grant front, if I may, I know that Mr. Neufeld hasn't shared this, but we have just applied for a very significant grant.
Great. Always love to hear that. Fingers crossed we're successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carreras. Mayor Ruby.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Just a very quick question. I'm trying to understand. I go out, I plant a tree. When is that actually considered tree canopy?
Yeah, through the chair, I guess suppose it would be dependent on how big the tree is that you planted. But you know, if you're planting, say, a standard street tree size tree, you know, if you look down above and you measured, you know, the area that the canopy takes up, it's probably maybe in the 1 to 2 square meters of area at that stage. And so as the tree, you know, every meter really essentially counts towards our tree canopy. When we fly LiDAR, you can see, you know, even the very small, really newly planted trees form part of that canopy measurement. And so as that, you know, 1 meter slowly expands into 5 and 10 and 20, and, you know, a fully mature tree is somewhere in the 50 to 80 square meters range per single tree. And so, you know, our canopy is growing as the tree grows, of course.
So how long does it take if you just go and, I mean, nobody's planting mature trees with massive tree canopy. So you go and you plant a regular tree, it starts off as what, a sapling, or how many years does it take to actually start to count in that tree cover?
You know, it does, apologies, through the chair here. It does really depend on the species and, you know, the optimal growing conditions and how healthy that tree is. But, you know, it can start making a substantial difference at the 10 to 20 year mark. And so, you know, this is a long-term investment of planting trees today, in today's dollars and today's, you know, methods and everything, that we're going to see, you know, have long-term benefits in the city. But it takes time. Yep.
And my final question, when we're talking about this, have we taken into consideration the type of trees that we want to see? So is there a strategy to bring in more hardy trees that grow maybe a little bit faster?
Through the chair, we, through our parks and facilities, our parks and operations kind of team, they have a really great kind of spreadsheet that we've been working on and working with as far as new species to plant. Metro Vancouver also has a great list of trees to plant in a changing climate. And so that's the other thing that we really have to be aware of and consider, is that our climate is changing quite quickly, and the trees that we planted, you know, 10, 15 years ago are not necessarily going to be the right trees for the next 50 years or so. So there's new species being tried out. There's trees that are better adapted for a drier, more kind of severe weather climate that we're always making use of. And it's important to have a variety, a good, you know, biodiverse variety of trees that we're planting too, so that we can be a little more resilient for pests and things that come up.
So along that lines, with climate change, are there certain types of trees that do better with the changing climate? We're seeing a lot of forest fires out there. The last thing we need to see is our tree canopy being destroyed by fires. So where does that play into all of this?
Yep, through the chair, there's definitely certain species that are better adapted for a hotter, drier climate. You know, typically when we're planting street trees, they're often deciduous trees, so trees that lose leaves in the winter, not the coniferous ones. Coniferous ones being, you know, a little more prone to wildfire and fire threat. But that being said, a lot of our kind of natural forested areas are still that coniferous forest. So, you know, and most of our native trees are conifers like that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and you were well within your time, so I was not concerned at all. Want to keep going?
If you want me to keep talking, I'll talk.
Sure. And Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you to staff, we're talking about a lot of trees here. Has there been much consideration within this strategy and plan for other plants or forms of plants that would be pollinator friendly?
Yeah, through the chair. One of the very first infographics kind of showed all the different things that make up the urban forest. And you're right, absolutely right. It's not just trees, it's the shrubbery and things that kind of go in the understory of forests as well. And so, that's often a consideration for reforesting areas or, planting back, some habitat value in areas that are cleared, where we plant a variety of different, mostly native plants typically that have good pollinator benefits and can form that kind of cohesive ecosystem as part of it.
Thank you for that. And if I may, through you, Madam Chair, again, just to confirm, so do we have a focus on specifically pollinator-friendly shrubbery and plants outside of trees in order to help that biodiversity within our urban surrounding?
Through the chair, it's definitely a consideration. I would say not necessarily the focus of this strategy, but of course, planting pollinator-friendly species across our various landscapes. These do come into play through design guidelines in our development permits, that we are looking for certain species and types and a variety of plants that have different flowering periods and everything.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef. And some of my questions, I am curious about when I look at the tree canopy cover percentage, I see the Hammond area, the South Alouette area, the Town Center area, it's a little bit underserved here. So my question is, what is our path to making those areas look visually different come 10, 20 years?
Yeah, through the chair. You're right, absolutely right. There's quite a variety of different tree canopy coverages across the neighborhoods in Maple Ridge. It's definitely not all equal. And one of the maps in the urban forest management strategy is a tree equity map, which compares tree canopy coverage to a number of different equity indicators. And so what it shows is areas where there's low tree equity that arguably, those should be our first to prioritize for new tree plantings. And so taking that approach, those would be the areas that we would focus on our tree planting efforts on in the first phases of the implementation of this plan.
Okay, thank you. Because I just want to make sure I understand. So what is our vision here for those areas? If council were to endorse this plan, would someone be able to say, well, okay, great. Now, if I live in South Alouette area, my area is going to look like what in 10 years?
Yeah, through the chair, it's not necessarily as simple as that. Some of the areas, such as the South Alouette, are mostly farmland. And so, some of the reasoning behind why it's at 15% of tree canopy coverage is because it's farmed. And,
Thank you. I take back the South Alouette area. We sort of concentrate on the Town Center, West Maple Ridge, Hammond area.
Yes.
Maybe that'll be more helpful.
Yeah. And I think some of those other ones on that lower side of the tree canopy are neighborhoods that were developed kind of prior to street trees being a requirement. And so what that may look like is adding street trees to existing streets where there are not street trees right now.
Right. And so I just want to understand as well, because when I was looking at that page 56 of this document, and we're looking at the breakdown between public and private plantings, even for the 40% target, I think we're looking at like 400 tree plantings, private 370 public trees planted per year, which is, wonderful and also not a lot. So I'm just trying to understand, what, I think, I'm trying to understand like visually what people can expect, and sort of asking the same question again, because I think, if 40% is one thing, but I can't visualize 40%. How would I explain to a resident of the west side of Maple Ridge, when we pass this plan, or if we pass this plan, this is what our vision is for your area?
Through the chair, I think, probably the easiest way to describe it is to say, this neighborhood has 40% tree canopy coverage. So I'm just kind of looking at my cheat sheet here that the Albion area within the Albion area plan, that's about 44% tree canopy coverage right now. That being said, there's a lot of creek corridors and water courses in that area that have high tree canopy coverage in them. And so, maintaining more of those kind of areas, having pockets of large, dense tree canopy coverage in there. It's filling in the gaps along our roads and right of ways where there aren't street trees planted, and to have that kind of canopy coverage along the roads. I think that's an important piece of a relatively easy way that we can add tree canopy coverage across these kind of areas.
Thank you. I think I saw something in the report about tree canopy minimums. Do we have tree canopy minimums in mind for those areas?
Through the chair, I think those would be developed as we have a mechanism to get there. So typically that's done through the area planning process, where we can have, as you're redeveloping, we can set some minimum targets to achieve on a site-by-site basis. Without that, there's not really a mechanism to say, we're gonna have this as a minimum, unless we are actively planting across those kind of public-owned areas, so roads and parks within that area. Some of the other kind of suggestions in the master plan or the urban forest management strategy is to have minimum targets in various different park classifications. So across neighborhood parks, say we would target a 40% tree canopy coverage. Across community parks, we could target a 30% tree canopy coverage or something like that.
Thank you. And all my questions are both to you and to the consultant. So what is our vision here for those neighborhoods that are between under, Hammond, it's under the 20% level. Some neighbors I see at 20 to 40% tree coverage. What is generally our vision with a 40% overall urban area target? What are our draft targets for those neighborhoods?
Through the chair, we haven't got to that level of implementation yet. The strategy just talks about creating those targets, and we would do that as there's an opportunity. So in the area planning process, typically, but I would suggest it's going to be a long stretch to get from a 15% canopy coverage to 40%, and that may not just be realistic in the scope and timeline of 20 years in here.
Right. And because this is a topic of great interest to me, I'll continue to ask on this topic, which is given this strategy, does it outline actions that give us a realistic plan? As you said, realistic goals to get a neighborhood from 15% to something that is visually different?
Yeah, through the chair, I think the detailed action plan, there's 59 action items in there. I think if we're working towards all of those and achieving them, we should get to that 40% tree canopy coverage across the city. And by doing that, there'll need to be significant gains across a lot of these areas, just to raise all of the tree canopy across the city, while focusing really on those areas of low tree equity.
Thank you. My next question is around the newer neighborhoods. I get asked, when I walk through Silver Valley, for example, when the trees are relatively young, so similar on the same maybe vein of thought as Mayor Rumi's, whereas trees are planted, they are relatively small and they don't provide that much tree canopy when first planted. So I'm curious about the types of trees that we choose to plant. Are there trees that we can plant or does the strategy speak about trees planting trees that provide for that larger canopy, sort of like expansive, abundant sort of canopy, as opposed to the sort of trees that may have limited canopy?
Yeah, through the chair, it's when we select tree species for individual sites, it's really this kind of mantra of the right tree in the right spot. And that's something that we have to be really aware of when we're selecting those species, because we don't want a tree that will grow too fast, too quickly, and then have issues. There are some trees that are relatively short-lived and have branches that break off, et cetera, et cetera. And so we do need to be picking the right tree for that right location. That's not necessarily always the tree that grows the fastest and the quickest either. And so, we have to think really long term of what we're going to get as the best value and the best, tree species in that location, a good diverse range of species as well too.
Thank you. And maybe opening up to round two. Anyone with questions for round two? Councillor Schiller.
Okay, my first question for round two is, we have a total of 3 rounds, right? 2?
No, there is 3. First 2 rounds are 10 minutes. Third round is 5.
Thank you. Okay. So the 40% canopy target, was there ever a higher target considered?
Through the chair, 40% is about the highest target that we really considered. And I say that of course, we did talk internally about, what would it mean to get to 50%, or what would it mean to get there without running, the canopy model and doing that level of effort. Part of the reason why, we stuck with the 40% is 40% is already, as you can see in the plan, that's a significant amount of new trees that need to be planted every year. That will be a challenge to meet already. By taking it to that next level of going higher and more, we need to start incorporating more measures that start to restrict development or to reduce the density in certain areas. Because we would need to be protecting and retaining existing tree canopy coverage at a much higher rate than what we're currently doing.
Okay. And part of the reason that I ask about that is because I feel like the 40% is a pretty standard target. If I look at other plans, that was the first target that I ever heard when we talked about a draft. Sorry, Valerie, Ms. Richmond, did you want to just jump in on that?
If I may, through Madam Chair, to that question. So when you heard from us in February, we were really clear that this 40% is an aspirational target, but we feel achievable. So it's not baseline. This is aspirational. There are very few municipalities who are going for 40%. We are one of the few.
Fair enough. And I do remember that conversation. I just also am reflecting that I feel like in some of our earlier discussions, we acknowledged the tree cover that we're blessed to be beginning with. We acknowledge the importance of the access to nature that our residents regularly relay to us. And so I was just curious. So if, I think that's a reasonable characterization of the response, like there was 81% of the public wanted a higher number. So how was that feedback incorporated into this final draft?
Yeah, these are really great questions, and we appreciate this conversation with council very much. Just putting this into context, overall, currently we have across Maple Ridge that 54% canopy coverage through both our rural and our urban areas. So as we move the needle in our urban area from 38, and you've heard from Mr. Neufeld how that will take us 10, even 20 years to grow the canopy to that 40%. We don't anticipate seeing significant changes in our rural areas. Those are outside of our urban containment boundaries. So overall, Maple Ridge will still continue to be achieving well over 50% in canopy overall.
Fair enough. Yes. Okay, thank you. Another thing I wanted to ask about was interim targets, because I think it's tricky with a 20-year time horizon, right? You feel like you have lots of time to get there, and then maybe by the time you realize you're not going to get there, you've sort of run out of runway to achieve that target. Do we have examples of other strategies that set interim targets or identify decreases that would trigger some serious reactions? So interested in either examples of interim targets, or if that was something that was looked at. And I'm just imagining a scenario where 5 years from now, we look at the tree canopy and maybe it's gone down, maybe it's gone down 10%. I mean, is there some sort of change, decrease that's sort of been identified as being the maximum that's acceptable? Or that would trigger some serious changes in our approach?
I know Mr. Neufeld is thinking about this one, but maybe I could weigh in a little bit as well through the chair to this one. So you've heard from Mr. Neufeld that some of the policy pieces that need to be implemented is our area plans, and our community planning team have been involved in the development of this strategy all the way along. What this might look like is for the Lougheed Transit Corridor Area Plan, that this 40% target is baked into that plan and achievable. So we will have a level of comfort that we are moving in the right direction within our urban containment boundary. We certainly know in any year and are able to report out on the number of street trees that are delivered through development. And every year, we're currently tracking over 15,000 street trees. And we see about, in any one year, about 1,000 more added in there. So looking at both what's delivered on the public side of land, in our parks and on our streets, and in conjunction with what is embedded in our area plans, we'll have a sense that we're on the road to achieving this. If we're not, that's where that what was it? The check-in. Thank you for those words. The check-in annually is going to be an important tool for staff as well as council to know where we are and whether we, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then just in follow-up, could staff or the consultant just let me know if they're familiar with any strategies that do set interim targets 2 years, 5 years, or is it typically this longer time horizon?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of any that have interim targets as far as urban forest management strategies. Not to say that that doesn't necessarily exist, but I think that is really the point of the 5-year kind of check-in to see, measure and take stock of what we're currently doing and how close we are or are not to achieving those goals.
Okay, thank you. I like this clock. It helps me. So then my question would be to our clerk's staff or our corporate staff. If I personally would want to put for a motion to change the canopy target, is that something I can do at this meeting?
We could, but the consideration will come forward on Tuesday. The motion that is recommended is that the plan be endorsed in principle. So I would suggest that the further discussion to change anything be put forward as an amendment on Tuesday evening.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to consider that for a moment. I think one thing I'm really struggling with is the financial implications of this. So I want more trees, okay, but yes, there is a number at which that, you know, I'm trying to do some rough math even with the plan we have, and it's just very challenging because.
And Councillor Ursula, I'm personally a fan of thinking out loud, and it is committee of the whole, and we are asking questions at this venue. And I'm just informed that we have 2 rounds of 10 minutes, and the 3rd round was in a special circumstance that I get a nod. So.
Okay, what is that special circumstance?
It's if there's an amendment, but I actually must correct myself. I read the wrong line, that it was actually supposed to be 5, 5, and 5 at Cal. So I apologize. I won't change it for today because that wouldn't be fair, but just moving forward. So yes, if there was an amendment, so council could, I guess, consider an amendment today and have an additional 5 minutes to speak to that.
Okay.
But I guess I will put a disclaimer on that. I think an amendment is referring to a bylaw. So when you have any of your rezoning bylaws coming forward or anything like that at a cow, that's an amendment to me. A discussion on this would not necessarily be an amendment.
And so then a discussion on this would be best left to next week's council meeting?
Yes.
I just want to clarify. Okay. Could I ask that for next week, staff do provide us some financial implications for achieving our target that we have set? What's a rough number that's going to cost us per year, as well as a 45% target, so that I can just understand what the implications are? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. With 4 seconds on the clock, Councillor Dweck.
Thank you. So I appreciate the passion. My concern with asking staff, you know, if all of council's in favor with that, I'm good. But when one or two of us are asking staff to go away and do a huge amount of work, because that's not going to be an easy task. Because financial, like we've heard today that it is going to have a budget impact. We currently don't have a budget for that. That's a business planning discussion. So as I said, I appreciate the passion here, but the principle, it's in principle. So at next Tuesday's council meeting would be the appropriate time to raise that for a number of reasons. I haven't weighed into the discussion yet because I have no questions. So I need to be able to do that at next Tuesday's meeting. And then if you want to, you would ask for an amendment after hearing from everyone around the table, because we're not allowed to give our opinions right now. We're only allowed to ask questions.
Thank you, Councillor Dweck. You're looking for anyone else for round two? Seeing no further questions, I would invite please someone to move this item. That we have done that. I'm lost now after this long discussion. We have moved the item. So now I get to check again that we have no further discussion. I get to thank Mr. Neufeld for your presentation, for your many, many responses to our questions. And I get to ask folks if we would like to move this to the next council meeting. All in favor? Thank you. That carried unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next item is item 9.1, the Patch Brewery Liquor License Lounge Endorsement. There's an application been made for a brewery lounge endorsement as an amendment to the existing manufacturer's license to allow on-site alcohol sales and consumption from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday. There is no presentation, but staff are in attendance if council has any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I please invite someone to move this item? Moved by Councillor Youssef and seconded by Councillor Schiller. And does anyone have any questions? Councillor Carreras.
Thanks. Sorry, I was sort of hopeful there would be a presentation on this. I just have a couple of questions. If you can just walk through what exactly this is, because I think this is the first time this has come to us. And so reading the package, I think it just has to have our check off before it goes to the liquor distribution. But if you can just walk us through the process for things like that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
No problem. I can definitely do that. Thank you and good afternoon. So the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, the LCRB, received an application from the Patch Brewery located at 12745 Lady Street for a lounge endorsement to the manufacturing brewery license. The lounge endorsement, if approved, would allow on-site alcohol sales and consumption from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Sunday. There's a seating capacity of 198, and they will be retailing pizza, salads, charcuterie boards, and other small snacks. They will also be offering coffee, tea, craft sodas, juice, and water. So I can go a little bit about the actual program. And a manufacturer license allows you to make wine, beer, or spirits. There are 3 different manufacturer licenses: a winery, a brewery, and a distillery. You can customize your license with endorsements. There's an on-site endorsement, a lounge endorsement, which this is, a special event area, a picnic area, liquor sales at artisan farmers and annual markets. A lounge is primarily for the sale of drinks made under the license, but they also may sell liquor through other manufacturers as well. And the lounge may be located indoors or outdoors on a patio. And part of the process requires council to gather views of the residents who may be affected by the establishment of this liquor license in the neighborhood. 46 letters were sent to owners and occupants of the property within 200 meters of the subject site. There were no responses. The Ridge Meadows RCMP checked their records and they have no issues there at all. There's adequate parking on site. And the three closest liquor primary license, which are mentioned in the report, are the Reach Neighborhood Pub at 203 in Dewdney, the Ranch Pub at 219-132. And since the report was started, I didn't catch this at the end, the Silver Valley Brewing Company has since closed.
Okay, so it's just that they do the application, but to do a full application, it comes to the city for us to endorse and say, we're good with this.
That's
And
correct.
Okay, that's, yeah, I just want, okay, perfect,
Yeah.
Thank you. Looking for any further questions on this item? Seeing no further questions, thank you, Director Adams. And calling for, what am I saying here? And all those in favor, please, of moving this to the next council meeting. Thank you. Carried unanimously. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next item is community forum. Participants in the community forum are reminded that there should be no discussion of public hearing bylaws which have not yet reached conclusion. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak to council. A second opportunity may be provided once all speakers in the queue have had an opportunity to speak. A second opportunity may be provided once all speakers in the queue have had an opportunity to speak. The total time allotted community forum is 15 minutes. If you wish to inquire about additional opportunities to address council, please contact the corporate officer. For members of the public who would like to speak during community forum, clearly state your name and city of residence before beginning your comments. If you are participating electronically, please use the raise hand icon, and when called upon, please turn on your camera. If you are attending the meeting in person, please come forward to the podium when the chair invites speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Does anyone from the public wish to address council? Is anyone online? Come on down. And please state your name and city of residence for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Mike Formosa. I live in Maple Ridge. It was nice seeing that for a forest and urban trees and urban forest is important to the community here, but nobody's really protecting it. So I don't have this planned out. So this is going to be a hosh posh of stuff here. I guess my question is Maple Ridge safe? Would you consider Maple Ridge to be safe? I guess my question is to you, Mayor. There was just a murder in broad daylight in the middle of town, in the middle of Friday, in the middle of rush hour. A gun was pointed to people while they were driving in the public. I don't think that's right. Like that's actually just crazy. Yeah, here, I don't really got this all planned out. I'm probably just gonna be ranting, so this isn't the right thing to do. But I guess my question is like, how much garbage is collected from the city each year in tons in the urban forests and stuff from these people that are down on their luck? There's lots of garbage that is getting picked up daily around where I live. There's tons of people living around where I reside. There's a lady that has assaulted me. She's made racist remarks to a woman that lives in my building just for her living on her property and enjoying her balcony. I don't think that's right. I don't think a lot of you think that's right either, but it's allowed in Maple Ridge, and that's not right at all. I don't know if many of you do live in Maple Ridge, but I wonder if you guys do feel safe when you guys are walking around at night. Would you walk around at night, your dog? Would you let your loved one walk around at night? I have a girlfriend who's is pregnant and we're expecting. And it scares me to let her walk my dog around here. Yeah, I just don't feel the community is safe, and I don't feel like the community is doing enough for the people who live here. And
Thank you, sir. I
Yeah.
really appreciate your comments, and
Thank you.
we appreciate you taking the time to come out here. And we've noted your many comments, and public safety is on the minds of all of us, and we can get you an answer in terms of the specific questions you ask about. And if you, we do keep an eye out on nuisance properties in our city. And so if there's an address you'd like to leave with us, we can check I can refer that, or we as a body can refer that to the RCMP and see if.
There's tons of urban forest areas just in the run.
Thank you.
In the general areas.
Thank you. If you'd like to leave a specific address with us, please do let staff know. And we can also get you further answers to your questions. Thank you again. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or address council? No one online. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. The next item is notice of closed meeting, and the resolution is on the screen, posing under 91A, C, D, E, K, L, and 92B.
Thank you. Could I please invite someone to move this item? Moved by Councilor Carreras and seconded by Mayor Rumi. Are there any questions? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please. Thank you. Carried unanimously.
That's